My name is Rachel Martinez, and for 28 years I was the family disappointment. The one who couldn't finish anything. The one who lacked direction. Until the day a Pentagon official walked into my brother's law firm and asked to speak with Colonel Martinez. My family thought there had been a mistake. There hadn't been. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The Amtrak train pulled into Union Station in Hartford, Connecticut on a gray October morning. I stepped onto the platform, a military duffel bag slung over my shoulder, the familiar weight of secrecy pressing against my chest. 3 years since I'd been home, since I'd sat at their dinner table, since I'd endured the carefully crafted conversations that danced around my absence. The cab driver made small talk about the weather while I watched the suburbs roll past. Oak trees lined Morrison Avenue, their leaves turning amber and gold, same as they did every fall when I was growing up. Nothing had changed in Westfield Heights, the affluent neighborhood where image mattered more than substance, where success was measured in visible achievements and social media posts. The house stood exactly as I remembered it. Colonial style, perfectly manicured lawn, my mother's prize-winning rose garden still blooming despite the season. A Mercedes and a BMW sat in the driveway. New cars since my last visit, but the message remained the same. We've made it, and everyone should know. I paid the driver and stood on the sidewalk for a moment. Gathering myself through the large front window, I could see movement inside. Familiar shadows preparing for another Martinez family gathering. Another opportunity to discuss my brother David's latest legal victories and my sister Rema's promotion at the marketing firm. The front door opened before I could knock. Rach! My mother, Patricia Martinez, stood in the doorway wearing her signature pearls and an expression I knew well, the look she reserved for managing uncomfortable situations. You're early. Traffic was lighter than expected. She stepped aside, allowing me into the foyer that still smelled of expensive candles and furniture polish. The walls were lined with framed photographs, David shaking hands with the governor after winning a high-profile case, Emma accepting an award at some corporate event, family vacation photos from trips I hadn't been invited to. David's in his study, she said, smoothing her skirt. Emma should be here soon. She's bringing the kids. No questions about my flight, my life, my work, just logistics. As if I were a dinner guest she barely knew. The living room hadn't changed. Same leather furniture, same crystal vases, same sense that everything had its place and I had never quite found mine. David emerged from his study, phone pressed to his ear, gesturing animatedly as he spoke to what was obviously an important client. He held up one finger in my direction. Wait, and continued his conversation. 5 more minutes passed before he hung up. Rachel, good to see you. He offered a brief hug, the kind reserved for distant relatives. Sorry about that. Big case coming up. Federal contract dispute. Could make or break the firm. Sounds important. It is. The Pentagon's involved. Actually, major defense contractor trying to back out of a software development deal, $1 million litigation. He straightened his tie, the gesture automatic. But enough about work. How are you? Still doing that. Computer thing. The computer thing. As if my entire career could be dismissed with 3 words. Something like that. Emma arrived an hour later with her husband Tom and their 2 young children. She swept into the room like she owned it. Designer handbag. Perfect makeup. The kind of confidence that came from never doubting your place in the world. Rachel! Oh my God. Look at you. She air-kissed both my cheeks. You look healthy. Rural living must agree with you. Rural living. I'd been stationed in Virginia, not exactly a farming country, but Emma had a way of making everything I did sound quaint and temporary. Dinner was served at exactly 6 o'clock, crystal glasses, china plates, cloth napkin. My mother had prepared my childhood favorite, beef tenderloin with roasted vegetables, though she didn't mention it. The gesture hung in the air, unacknowledged but not unnoticed. The conversation flowed around me like water around a stone. David's latest courtroom victory. Emma's team landed a major advertising account. Tom's promotion to regional sales manager. Their children's achievements in school and sport. I listened, answered when directly addressed, but mostly watched the familiar dance of a family that had learned to function perfectly well without one of its members. So Rachel, my father finally turned to me, his voice carrying that forced cheerfulness he used when he felt obligated to include me.
What exactly are you doing these days?
Your mother mentioned you were still in Virginia. I work for the government. Doing what exactly? I took a sip of wine, choosing my words carefully. Cybersecurity, information systems. David perked up. Like IT support, that's actually not bad. Government jobs have good benefits. Steady work. Sure. I bet it's nice having a routine, Emma added. No pressure. No deadlines. Must be relaxing after all those years of, well, trying to find your direction. All those years, she was referring to my college experience, when I'd changed majors 3 times before finally settling on computer science. What they didn't know was that I'd been deliberately obscuring my true focus, taking courses in psychology and international relations, alongside my technical studies. What looked like indecision had actually been preparation. The benefits are good, I agreed. My mother cleared her throat. Well, it's wonderful that you found something stable. Not everyone is cut out for high-pressure careers. The implication hung heavy. Not like David with his high-stakes litigation. Not like Emma with her client presentations and marketing campaigns. Just steady, predictable work for people who couldn't handle the real challenges. After dinner, I helped clear the dishes, falling into the old rhythm of family maintenance. In the kitchen, my mother and I worked in practiced silence, loading the dishwasher with careful precision. Your room is ready, she said eventually. I kept it exactly as you left it. That wasn't entirely true. My childhood bedroom had been gradually converted into my mother's craft room over the years. My old desk now held her sewing machine. My bookshelf stored her yarn and fabric. But the bed remained, along with a few token items from my teenage years. I climbed the stairs as conversations continued below. David was telling Tom about his Pentagon case again, his voice carrying that particular pride he reserved for his biggest achievement. Emma was showing my parents photos on her phone, probably from their latest family vacation to somewhere expensive and photogenic. My old room felt like a museum exhibit. The walls still held my high school academic achievement certificates, though they were dwarfed by the craft supplies that now dominated the space. I sat on the narrow bed and pulled out my phone, scrolling through messages I couldn't respond to, emails that would have to wait. 3 missed calls from my commanding officer, 2 texts from my team leader asking about the upcoming briefing, a notification about the classified document review I needed to complete before Monday. I turned the phone face down and lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow morning, I would take the train back to Virginia, back to my real life, back to work that mattered in ways my family would never understand, back to being Colonel Martinez, not Rachel, who couldn't finish anything. The irony wasn't lost on me. While they saw my frequent moves and career changes as evidence of instability, each transition had been carefully orchestrated. The psychology degree that seemed like a detour had taught me how to read people, to understand motivation and deception. The international relations coursework had given me insight into global politics and conflict. The computer science foundation had been the technical backbone I needed. Every seemingly random choice had been building towards something they couldn't see because they'd never bothered to ask the right questions. Downstairs I could hear David holding court again, probably sharing war stories from his latest case. Emma's laugh punctuated the conversation at regular intervals, bright and confident. They had found their stages, their audiences, their ways to shine. I had found something else entirely. At midnight, the house finally settled into silence. I pulled out a photograph I kept tucked in my wallet, a picture from my last deployment, me standing with my team outside our command center, 5 faces, all women, all specialists in our field. Behind us, banks of monitors displayed real-time global security data, the kind of information that never made the evening news but shaped the safety of millions. In that photo I wasn't the family disappointment. I wasn't the one who couldn't find her direction or handle pressure. I was the officer who had identified and prevented 3 separate cyber attacks in the past 18 months. I was the analyst whose recommendations had influenced Pentagon policy on digital warfare. I was the leader whose team had earned commendations from people whose names appeared in classified documents. But tomorrow morning, I would wake up in my childhood bedroom, eat breakfast at my mother's kitchen table, and let them continue believing I was exactly who they thought I was. For now, That was easier than explaining the truth they weren't ready to hear. Breakfast at the Martinez house was a choreographed production. My mother had set the dining room table with her best china, as if we were hosting dignitaries rather than having a simple family meal. The morning light streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished hardwood floor. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. David sat at the head of the table, laptop open beside his plate, alternating between bites of eggs, Benedict, and rapid-fire typing. His phone buzzed constantly, texts from partners, calls from clients, the digital soundtrack of a man whose importance could be measured in interruptions. The Hartwell case is escalating, he announced to no one in particular. Pentagon's pushing back harder than expected. They want to audit every line of code in the software before they'll honor the contract. Emma looked up from her phone where she'd been scrolling through what appeared to be her company's social media metrics. Sounds stressful. How much is at stake again? 47 million. Plus punitive damages if we can prove the government breached in bad faith. David's chest puffed slightly. It's the kind of case that makes careers. My father nodded approvingly from behind his newspaper. Defense contracts are serious business. Not like the old days when a handshake meant something. The Pentagon doesn't operate on handshakes anymore. Dad? David said, finally closing his laptop. Everything's digital now. Encrypted communications, classified databases, cyber warfare protocols. It's a whole different world. I nearly choked on my orange juice. David was describing my daily reality as if it were exotic foreign territory, something he'd read about in legal briefs rather than lived and breathed for the past 8 years. Speaking of which, Emma said, turning toward me with that bright smile she used when she was about to say something she thought was helpful. David's firm is actually hiring. They need someone to organize their digital files, maybe help with basic computer maintenance. It's not glamorous, but it pays well and you'd be working with family. The offer hung in the air like smoke. My brother's administrative assistant, filing his emails, troubleshooting his printer problems, grateful for the opportunity to be useful in a real job with real responsibility. That's thoughtful, I said carefully, but I'm pretty committed to my current position. In Virginia? My mother's eyebrows raised slightly. Doing what, exactly? You were always so vague about the details. David leaned forward, his lawyer instincts sensing an opportunity to cross-examine. Mom's right, Rachel. Every time we ask about your work, you give these generic answers. Computer security, government contractor, information systems. What does that actually mean? I took a slow sip of coffee, buying time. The truth was classified at levels they couldn't even imagine. The real answers involved threat assessments that shaped international policy, cyber defense strategies that protected critical infrastructure, intelligence analysis that prevented attacks before they happened. But classification levels weren't the only barrier. Even if I could tell them everything, would they believe it? I analyze data, I said finally. Look for patterns, potential security risks. Write reports. See? That's exactly what I mean, David said, leaning back with the satisfied expression of a prosecutor who'd made his point. Data, analysis, security risks, reports. It sounds like entry-level corporate work dressed up with government terminology. Emma nodded sympathetically. And that's fine, Rachel. Not everyone needs to be a partner in a law firm or run marketing campaigns. Steady work is nothing to be ashamed of. Absolutely not. My mother agreed, her voice carrying that particular tone she used when she wanted to sound supportive while making it clear that support was needed. We're proud of you for finding something stable. After all those years of changing majors and switching directions, it's wonderful that you've settled into something manageable. Manageable. The word sat heavy in my stomach, right next to the eggs, Benedict that suddenly tasted like cardboard. My father folded his newspaper with a crisp snap. The important thing is that you're contributing, Rachel. Government work might not be prestigious, but it serves a purpose. Someone has to do the behind-the-scenes jobs. Behind the scenes. If only he knew. David's phone rang, and he glanced at the screen before answering. Martinez and Associates, David, speaking. He listened for a moment, his expression growing serious. Yes, I understand. When do they want to schedule the deposition? Another pause. No, we can't delay it any further. The Pentagon wants answers, and our client is getting nervous. He hung up and rubbed his temples. The government's bringing in their heavy hitters for this case. Department of Defense cybersecurity specialists, classified document reviewers, the works. They're not playing around. What kind of specialists? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Digital forensics experts, mainly. People who understand the technical side of what our client was supposed to deliver. The Pentagon wants to verify that the software actually meets their security specifications before they'll pay another dime. Emma made a sympathetic noise. That sounds complicated. Do you understand all the technical stuff? I've got consultants for that, David said with a wave of his hand. My job is legal strategy, not computer science. I leave the technical details to the experts. The irony was almost painful. David was about to face Pentagon cybersecurity specialists in what he called the case of his career, while dismissing his sister's work in that exact same field as basic computer maintenance. When is this deposition happening? My father asked. Next week. The Pentagon's sending their review team to my office Thursday morning, full evaluation of the software, complete audit of our client's work, the whole 9 yards. David's jaw tightened. It's going to be intense. These DoD people don't mess around when it comes to national security. My mother reached over and patted his hand. You'll be brilliant, sweetheart. You always are. I hope so. This case could make the firm win this one, and will be the go-to practice for defense contractor disputes on the East Coast. I finished my coffee and stood, collecting my plate. I should probably head out soon. Train back to Virginia leaves at noon. So soon. Emma looked genuinely disappointed. I was hoping we could spend more time together. Maybe do some shopping. Catch up properly. Next time, I said, though we both knew there probably wouldn't be one. These visits happened every few years, duty calls that satisfied everyone's sense of family obligation without requiring any real connection. In the kitchen, I loaded my plate into the dishwasher while my mother hovered nearby, clearly wanting to say something but struggling with the words. Rachel, she finally said, her voice softer than usual. You know we want the best for you. Right? It's just that sometimes it seems like you're, I don't know, hiding from something. Or maybe hiding something from us. I turned to face her, this woman who had raised me, fed me, worried about me, and never once asked the right questions about who I'd become. I'm not hiding, Mom. I'm just living my life. But you're so secretive about everything. Your work, your friends. Where you live. It's like you don't trust us. Trust. The word carried weight. She couldn't imagine. In my world, trust was earned through security clearances and proven through years of classified work. Trust meant knowing that the person next to you would keep secrets that could endanger lives if revealed. Trust was something you built with people who understood the stakes. It's not about trust, I said gently. Some things are just private. She nodded, though her expression suggested she didn't really understand. Well, you know we're here, if you ever need anything. If the government job doesn't work out or if you want to come home and start over, there's always a place for you here. Start over. As if my entire adult life had been a mistake that needed correcting. I know, Mom. Thank you. An hour later, I stood in the foyer, with my duffel bag, accepting final hugs and promises to stay in touch. David was already back on his phone, pacing in his study as he prepared for his upcoming Pentagon showdown. Emma was organizing playdates for her children, her calendar app open as she juggled the complex logistics of suburban motherhood. My mother handed me a container of leftover beef tenderloin. For the train, she said, you've gotten too thin. The taxi pulled into the driveway, and I escaped into the crisp October air. Through the living room window, I could see my family returning to their normal rhythms, my brief presence already fading into memory. As Hartford suburbs gave way to farmland and forest, I pulled out my secure phone and scrolled through the messages that had accumulated overnight. 3 separate briefings scheduled for next week, a classified report that needed my review before Thursday, a team meeting to discuss the preliminary findings on a potential Chinese cyber infiltration, and there, buried in the routine notifications, was a message that made me smile. Pentagon Review Team Deployment Confirmed. Subject: Hartwell Defense Systems Software Audit. Location: Martinez and Associates Law Firm, Hartford, CT. Team Leader: Colonel R. Martinez. I was going home again, sooner than expected. And this time, I wouldn't be the family disappointment sitting quietly at the dinner table. This time I'd be the Pentagon specialist David was worried about facing. Thursday morning arrived with the crisp efficiency of military precision. I stood in my Arlington apartment at 0500 hours, uniform pressed and ready, reviewing the Hartwell Defense Systems case file one final time. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. In less than 4 hours, I would walk into my brother's law firm as the Pentagon official he'd been dreading to face. My team was already assembled at the Pentagon briefing room when I arrived. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Chen, my second-in-command, had the technical specifications spread across 3 monitors. Major James Rodriguez was reviewing the classified security protocols we'd need to verify. Captain Lisa Thompson sat with a stack of legal documents, cross-referencing contract requirements with actual software deliverables. Status report, I said, settling into my chair at the head of the conference table. Hartwell's software fails basic encryption standards, Chen said without preamble. The authentication protocols are vulnerable to brute force attacks, and their data handling violates DoD security requirements on at least 12 separate counts. Rodriguez nodded grimly. It gets worse. Their source code contains backdoors that weren't declared in the original specifications. Either they're incompetent, or they deliberately tried to hide security vulnerabilities. Any chance this is salvageable? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Not without a complete rebuild, Thompson replied. We're looking at fundamental architectural flaws, not surface-level bugs. The Pentagon would be paying $47 million for software that poses a national security risk. I closed the file and looked at my team, 3 of the most skilled cybersecurity professionals in the military, people who understood that our work protected millions of Americans who would never know their names. In a few hours, my brother would try to convince us that this flawed software deserved full payment and government approval. Martinez and Associates requested a preliminary conference before the formal review, Chen said. They want to present their client's position first, try to frame the narrative. Let them, I said. It won't change the technical reality. The drive to Hartford took exactly 2 hours and 15 minutes. I sat in the passenger seat of our unmarked government vehicle while Rodriguez navigated the morning traffic. Chen reviewed her checklist in the back seat, ensuring every piece of equipment we'd need for the software audit was accounted for. Thompson studied legal precedents on her tablet, preparing for whatever arguments David's firm might attempt. You seem unusually calm for a case this big, Rodriguez observed as we entered Hartford city limits. If only he knew. Just focused. $47 million and potential national security implications, Chain added from the back seat. Plus, this Martinez lawyer has been making noise about government overreach and bad faith contract disputes. He's trying to turn this into a political issue. Let him try, I said. Facts don't have political affiliations. Martinez and Associates occupied the 15th floor of a glass tower in downtown Hartford. The lobby was all marble and mahogany, designed to project success and stability. A young receptionist with perfectly styled hair and a nervous smile greeted us at the elevator. The Pentagon team, I assume, she said, her voice carrying the kind of reverence people reserved for federal officials. Mr. Martinez is expecting you. Conference room A. The elevator ride felt surreal. In less than 60 seconds I would see David again, but this time as Colonel Martinez rather than his disappointing sister Rachel. My reflection in the polished elevator doors showed no hint of nervousness, just a crisp military uniform, command insignia, and the composed expression I'd perfected over years of high-stakes briefings. Conference Room A was impressive, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hartford skyline, a massive table that could seat 20 people, and enough technology to support complex presentations. David stood at the far end, adjusting his tie while speaking quietly with a woman I assumed was his partner. Two other lawyers flanked a nervous-looking man in an ill-fitting suit who had to be the Hartwell Defense Systems representative. David looked up as we entered, his confident expression faltering slightly when he saw the military uniforms. This wasn't a meeting with faceless government bureaucrats. This was the Pentagon in person, in his conference room. "Gentlemen, ma'am," he said, recovering his composure and moving forward with his hand extended. "David Martinez, senior partner. Thank you for making the trip to Hartford." I let Chen and Rodriguez handle the initial introductions while I observed David's body language. He was nervous but trying to hide it, using the expansive gestures and commanding voice that worked so well in courtrooms. He had no idea that his biggest challenge wasn't the legal arguments he'd prepared. It was standing 3 feet away in a colonel's uniform. "This is Colonel Martinez," Chen said when the introductions reached me. "She'll be leading today's technical review." David's eyes widened slightly. "Martinez? Any relation to the Connecticut Martinezes?" He laughed nervously. "Common name, I suppose." "Very common," I agreed, accepting his handshake with professional neutrality. For a split second, something flickered in his expression, a moment of almost recognition, like seeing a familiar face in a crowd but being unable to place it. Then it passed, and he was back to his lawyer persona. "Well, Colonel Martinez, I hope you'll keep an open mind during today's proceedings. This case involves some complex technical issues, but more importantly, it's about the government's obligation to honor its contracts." "We're here to evaluate technical compliance," I replied evenly. "Nothing more, nothing less." David gestured toward the conference table. "Please, have a seat. We've prepared a comprehensive presentation that should address your concerns about the Hartwell software." As we settled around the table, I caught sight of the family photo on David's desk, the 4 of us from last Christmas. Everyone smiling for the camera. I was positioned slightly apart from the group as always, but present. David glanced at the photo, then at me, and for another brief moment that flicker of confusion crossed his face. "Shall we begin?" David's partner, a sharp-eyed woman named Janet Pierce, activated the room's presentation system. The Hartwell defense contract represents 18 months of intensive development work, specifically designed to meet Pentagon cybersecurity requirements. "We've reviewed your client's submission," Rodriguez said, opening his tablet. "There are significant concerns about encryption standards and authentication protocols, which we're prepared to address." Pierce replied smoothly. "Our technical team has conducted extensive testing." "Internal testing," Chen interrupted, "which failed to identify vulnerabilities that were apparent within the first hour of our independent analysis." David leaned forward, his lawyer instincts taking over. "With respect, Colonel Chen, internal testing is standard industry practice. The Pentagon's own acquisition guidelines acknowledge." "Mr. Martinez," I said quietly, and something in my voice made him stop mid-sentence. "We're not here to debate acquisition policy. We're here to determine whether your client's software meets the security requirements specified in the contract." "Of course, Colonel Martinez. I simply want to ensure that all perspectives are considered." Thompson spread out her legal documents. "The contract specifically requires AES 256 encryption for all data transmission. Your client implemented AES 228, which is insufficient for classified communications." The Hartwell representative, who had been silent until now, finally spoke up. "AES 228 is still considered secure by industry standards, not by Pentagon standards," I said firmly. "Not for the applications specified in this contract, not for systems that will handle classified information vital to national security." David's confident expression was beginning to crack. This wasn't going the way he'd planned. His technical consultants, had assured him that the software met reasonable security standards, but reasonable and Pentagon approved were very different things. Perhaps we could discuss potential modifications, Pierce suggested. Our client is willing to work with the government to address any technical concerns. At additional cost? Rodriguez asked. Pierce hesitated. Well, naturally, significant modifications would require. The contract specified delivery of compliant software, I said. Not partially compliant software that might become compliant with additional work and additional payment. David stood and walked to the window, clearly struggling to regain control of the meeting. When he turned back to face us, his expression was harder, more combative. Colonel Martinez, I've been practicing contract law for 12 years. I've handled dozens of government disputes. What you're describing sounds less like legitimate technical concerns and more like the Pentagon trying to avoid paying for work that was completed in good faith. The room went quiet. Chen and Rodriguez exchanged glances, recognizing the shift in tone. Thompson's fingers hovered over her keyboard, ready to document everything that was about to unfold. I stood slowly, my uniform crisp and commanding in the afternoon light streaming through the conference room windows. Mr. Martinez, I said, my voice carrying the authority of 8 years of classified briefings and life-or-death decisions. Are you suggesting that Pentagon cybersecurity professionals are fabricating technical deficiencies to avoid contractual obligations? David's face flushed red. I'm suggesting that sometimes technical evaluations can be influenced by budgetary considerations that have nothing to do with actual software performance. I see. I walked to the presentation screen where David's technical slides were still displayed. Then perhaps you'd like to explain why your client's authentication system uses deprecated hash algorithms that were deemed vulnerable by the National Institute of Standards and Technology 3 years ago. David blinked. That's a very specific technical question. My consultants assured me, or why the encryption keys are generated using a pseudo-random number generator with a known period vulnerability that could be exploited by any competent cryptanalyst. Colonel Martinez, I think there may be some misunderstanding. Or why the software contains 17 separate functions that write sensitive data to unencrypted log files, creating exactly the kind of information leakage that has compromised classified systems in the past. David stared at me, his confidence completely shattered. The technical details I was citing weren't in any briefing document his consultants had provided. This wasn't the kind of surface-level security review he'd been expecting. He began, then stopped, looking at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not the dismissive condescension of my family's disappointment, but something approaching respect and perhaps, buried deep beneath his lawyer's composure, a growing suspicion that Colonel Martinez was more than she appeared to be. Shall we proceed with the formal technical evaluation? I asked, returning to my seat with military precision. David nodded slowly, no longer the confident attorney who had greeted us an hour earlier. Yes, Colonel, I think that would be appropriate. The formal technical evaluation began at 2:30 p.m. sharp. David had retreated to his desk, making quiet phone calls to what I assumed were his technical consultants, trying to understand how his case had deteriorated so quickly. His partner Janet Pierce attempted to maintain professional composure, but her earlier confidence had evaporated. I connected my secure laptop to the conference room's presentation system, while my team set up their equipment. The Hartwell representative sat pale and silent, finally understanding that his company's software was about to be dissected by experts who knew exactly what to look for. Before we begin the code review, I announced, I want to address the broader implications of what we've discovered. David looked up from his phone calls, his expression wary. The software your client delivered isn't just substandard, I continued, pulling up a classified vulnerability assessment on the screen. It contains the exact type of security flaws that foreign intelligence services have exploited in previous attacks on American infrastructure. Pierce leaned forward. Colonel Martinez, are you suggesting our client intentionally compromised national security? I'm stating facts. Whether the vulnerabilities were intentional or the result of incompetence is for others to determine. I clicked to the next slide, showing a network diagram. What matters for this contract evaluation is that deploying this software would create entry points for hostile actors. Rodriguez stood and approached the presentation screen. In 2019, the Chinese successfully infiltrated 3 separate defense contractor networks, using precisely these authentication bypass techniques. The economic espionage cost exceeded $2 billion. In 2021, Chen added, Russian operatives used similar encryption weaknesses to access classified satellite communication protocols. That breach required 18 months to fully remediate. David's face had gone ashen. These weren't abstract technical discussions anymore. This was national security reality, presented by people who lived and breathed classified threats every day. Surely there's some middle ground, he said desperately. Software can be patched, security can be improved. Mr. Martinez, I interrupted, my voice carrying the weight of classified briefings and congressional testimony. You don't understand the stakes here. This isn't about technical perfection or reasonable commercial standards. This is about protecting systems that safeguard American lives. Thompson opened her legal folder. The contract specified delivery of software meeting Pentagon security requirements. Your client failed to deliver compliant software. The government has no obligation to pay for incomplete work. Incomplete? Pierce's voice rose. 18 months of development work. Millions of dollars invested. Wasted, I said flatly. Because your client either didn't understand the requirements or chose to ignore them. The room fell silent, except for the hum of electronic equipment. David stared at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not the dismissive tolerance of family gatherings, but something approaching awe mixed with growing suspicion. Colonel Martinez, he said slowly, your technical knowledge is remarkably detailed. Most Pentagon reviewers I've worked with rely heavily on written reports and consultant briefings. Most Pentagon reviewers haven't spent 8 years in active cyber warfare operations, I replied. Something shifted in David's eyes. He stood slowly, walking around his desk to get a better look at me. 8 years? That would mean you started when you were 20, I finished. Straight out of college. David's mouth opened slightly. He glanced at the family photo on his desk, then back at me, his lawyer's mind finally making connections he'd been too distracted to see earlier. You graduated from college at 20, he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. University of Connecticut, double major in computer science and international relations. Commissioned as a second lieutenant immediately upon graduation. Pierce looked between us, sensing undercurrents she couldn't understand. Chen and Rodriguez exchanged glances, recognizing that something personal was happening but maintaining professional neutrality. David's face was pale now, understanding beginning to dawn. Connecticut. You're from Connecticut. Hartford area, I confirmed, watching his world slowly collapse and rebuild itself. I grew up about 20 minutes from here, actually. That's quite a coincidence, he managed. Is it? I asked, meeting his eyes directly for the first time since I'd entered his conference room. The silence stretched until Pierce cleared her throat. Perhaps we should return to the technical evaluation, David, I said quietly, and something in the way I spoke his name made him freeze. He stared at me for a long moment, his brilliant legal mind finally processing what his emotions had been trying to tell him all afternoon. His eyes traced my face, looking past the uniform and the authority to find something familiar. Rachel? He whispered. The word hung in the air like a bomb that hadn't quite exploded yet. Chen's eyebrows raised slightly. Rodriguez shifted in his seat. Thompson's fingers stopped moving across her keyboard. Hello, David. He sank into his chair as if his legs had given out. You're Colonel Martinez. You're the Pentagon cybersecurity specialist. I am. But you work in data analysis. Entry-level government work. You told us. I told you I worked in cybersecurity for the government. You assumed the rest. Pierce was looking back and forth between us like she was watching a tennis match. I'm sorry, but what exactly is happening here? David ignored her, his eyes never leaving my face. When Mom said you worked in information systems, When you talked about analyzing data and writing reports, I analyze intelligence data that determines national security policy. I write classified reports that influence Pentagon decision-making. I manage teams of specialists who prevent cyber attacks on American infrastructure. I paused, letting the weight of those words settle. The reports I wrote last week shaped the defensive protocols your client's software was supposed to implement. Jesus Christ, David breathed. All this time, we thought you thought I was a failure. The family was disappointed that she couldn't handle pressure or finish what she started. Rachel. Colonel Martinez. I corrected gently but firmly. In this room, in this context, I'm Colonel Martinez. David's hands were shaking slightly. He looked at his partner, who was staring at both of us in complete bewilderment. Then back at me. How long? How long have you? 8 years active duty. Started as a second lieutenant in cyber operations. Made captain after 3 years, major after 5, lieutenant colonel after 7. I was promoted to full colonel 6 months ago, after successfully preventing a coordinated attack on East Coast power grids. Rodriguez coughed quietly. Colonel, perhaps we should. It's fine, Major. Mr. Martinez is just coming to terms with some new information. New information, David repeated. Numbly, my sister is a Pentagon colonel who's about to destroy the biggest case of my career. I'm not destroying anything, David. I'm doing my job. The same job I've been doing for 8 years while you assumed I was filing paperwork in some anonymous government office. Pierce finally found her voice. David, you know the Pentagon reviewer. This creates a conflict of interest, doesn't it? No conflict, I said before David could respond. I didn't request this assignment, and I won't recuse myself from legitimate Pentagon business because of family relationships. The software evaluation stands on its technical merits, nothing more. David was still staring at me like I was an alien that had assumed human form. At dinner last Sunday, when I was talking about the Pentagon bringing in cybersecurity specialists, you were sitting right there. You knew you were going to be reviewing my case. Yes, and you said nothing. What should I have said, David? Should I have announced that I was the colonel you were worried about facing? Should I have explained that your $47 million case was doomed because your client delivered fundamentally flawed software? You could have. I don't know. Give me some kind of warning. Warning you would have been unethical. It would have compromised the integrity of the review process. Pierce was scribbling notes furiously, probably trying to figure out if this family connection gave her any legal leverage. Colonel Martinez, given your relationship with opposing counsel, there is no relationship, I said sharply, my military authority cutting through the room like a blade. There is a Pentagon colonel conducting a legitimate security review, and there is a lawyer representing a client who failed to deliver contracted services. Family connections don't change technical realities. Chun cleared her throat. Colonel, we should probably continue with the formal evaluation. The Pentagon expects our report by the end of business tomorrow. I nodded, grateful for the reminder that we had actual work to complete. You're right, Mr. Martinez. We'll need access to your client's source code repositories and development documentation. David just sat there, looking lost. Pierce stepped in. Of course, Colonel. Though I think we should discuss the implications of your relationship with opposing counsel. The only implication, I said, closing my laptop with decisive finality, is that Mr. Martinez now understands exactly how serious Pentagon security requirements are. His client's software fails to meet those requirements. End of discussion. David finally seemed to find his voice. Rachel, Colonel, I need to call Mom. And Emma, they need to know what exactly. I asked. That their daughter isn't a failure. That she's actually spent 8 years serving her country at the highest levels of classified work. That while they were pitying her for not having a prestigious career, she was protecting national security. Yes, he said simply. All of that. I gathered my materials while my team packed up their equipment. At the conference room door, I turned back to face my brother, who was still sitting in stunned silence. "David," I said, my voice softer now, carrying just a hint of the sister he'd dismissed for so many years. "The next time someone tells you they work in cybersecurity for the government, maybe ask better questions." Then Colonel Martinez walked out of Martinez and Associates, leaving David to explain to his family how the sister they'd underestimated had just become the most important person in the room. The phone call came 3 hours after I'd left David's office. I was back in my Pentagon office, reviewing classified briefings and trying to compartmentalize the day's events, when my secure line rang. "Colonel Martinez." "Rachel," my mother's voice was barely a whisper. "David told us. He told us everything." I leaned back in my chair, looking out at the Washington skyline through my office window. Below, the city hummed with the business of the government, but up here in the classified floors of the Pentagon, the only sound was the soft hum of secure communications equipment. "What exactly did he tell you, Mom?" "That you're a colonel. That you've been a colonel. That you've been protecting the country while we—" Her voice broke. "While we thought you were failing at everything." The silence stretched between us, filled with 8 years of misunderstandings and assumptions. "I want to see you," she said finally. "We all do. Can you come home? Tonight?" Home. The word felt strange. For 8 years, home had been military bases and secure facilities, briefing rooms, and classified operation centers. Home had been anywhere the mission required me to be. "I'll be there by 8, I said. The drive from Washington to Hartford gave me time to think. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from my team, updates on other cases, requests for classified briefings. The Hartwell case was already closed in my mind. The software would be rejected, the contract voided, and David's firm would lose. That was just business. Just the natural consequence of technical realities meeting legal arguments. But the personal aftermath was more complicated. I pulled into the driveway of my childhood home, just as the sun was setting. The same Mercedes and BMW sat in their usual spots, but everything felt different now. The house that had always seemed to tower over me with its expectations and disappointments now looked smaller, more ordinary. Emma's car was there too, which meant this was going to be a full family reckoning. The front door opened before I could knock. My father stood there in his cardigan and reading glasses, looking older than I remembered but with an expression I'd never seen before. "Something that might have been respected, Rachel," he said simply, then stepped aside to let me in. The living room was arranged like a tribunal. Emma sat on the couch with her husband Tom, both of them looking shell-shocked. David occupied his usual chair, though his confident posture had been replaced by something resembling humility. My mother hovered near the fireplace, tissues in hand, clearly having been crying. I stood in the doorway for a moment, still wearing my uniform, the colonel's insignia catching the lamplight. For the first time in my life, I was the center of attention in this room, not because I'd failed at something, but because I'd succeeded beyond their ability to comprehend. "Sit down, sweetheart," my mother said, gesturing toward the empty chair that had always been mine during family gatherings. "Please." I remained standing. "Old habits." "David showed us the articles," Emma said, her voice small. "The ones about Pentagon cybersecurity initiatives. Your name is in 3 different Department of Defense press releases. 4, actually," I corrected, "but one was classified until last month." My father cleared his throat. "Rachel, we owe you an apology. A significant apology." "For what, specifically?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. They'd spent so many years dismissing me that they probably couldn't enumerate all the ways they'd been wrong. David spoke first. "For assuming you'd failed when you changed majors. For thinking you'd dropped out when you left for Virginia. For never asking what you actually did for work. For treating you like you were broken," Emma added, tears starting to flow. "For offering you a job filing papers when you were already running classified operations. For making you feel like you had to hide who you'd become," my mother whispered. I walked to the family photos that lined the mantelpiece, the shrine to David's legal victories, and Emma's corporate achievements. My own accomplishments were notably absent, not because I hadn't achieved anything, but because they'd never bothered to ask. You didn't make me hide anything, I said, turning back to face them. I chose not to share because you made it clear that my choices didn't matter to you. When I changed majors, you called it indecision. When I finished early, you assumed I'd quit. When I joined the military, you told people I was trying to find myself. We didn't know, my father said weakly. You didn't ask. The words came out sharper than I'd intended, carrying 8 years of accumulated frustration. For 8 years, none of you asked a single meaningful question about my life. You assumed I was struggling, failing, disappointing you. It was easier than admitting you might not understand what I was doing. Tom, who had been silent throughout the conversation, finally spoke. Rachel, the articles David showed us, they talk about preventing terrorist attacks, protecting infrastructure, briefing Congress. How long have you been doing work like that? Since my second year of active duty. I was identified for accelerated advancement after developing new protocols for detecting state-sponsored cyber intrusions. State-sponsored, Emma repeated slowly. You mean like foreign governments trying to attack America? Every day, I said simply. China, Russia, North Korea, Iran. They probe our systems constantly, looking for weaknesses. My job is to find those weaknesses first and close them. My mother sank into her chair. And we thought you were doing data entry. You thought what you wanted to think. It was comfortable for you to believe I was the family failure because it meant you didn't have to reconsider your assumptions about success. David leaned forward, his lawyer instincts finally engaging. Rachel, the work you described today, the technical knowledge you demonstrated, that level of expertise takes years to develop. How did you learn all that? The same way you learned contract law, training, experience, making mistakes and learning from them. The difference is that my mistakes could cost lives, so the military doesn't tolerate mediocrity. But you were always so quiet, Emma said. Even as a kid, you never talked about your ambitions or goals. I talked. You didn't listen. When I was 12, I told you I wanted to work for the government protecting computer systems. You told me that was a nice hobby, but I should focus on more practical careers. The memory hung in the air, sharp and painful. When I was 16, I continued, I won a national cybersecurity competition. The prize was a scholarship to MIT. You congratulated David on his debate team victory that same week, but never mentioned my award. We didn't realize, my mother began. You didn't realize, because you'd already decided I wasn't worth paying attention to. The room fell silent except for the ticking of the antique clock that had marked time in this house for decades. Outside, the suburban evening continued its peaceful rhythm, but inside, years of family mythology were crumbling. What happens now? Emma asked finally. I looked around the room at these people who had raised me, fed me, housed me, and fundamentally misunderstood me for my entire adult life. Now you know the truth, I said. I'm not the family disappointment. I'm a Pentagon colonel with top-secret clearance who briefs senior military officials on threats you can't imagine. I've prevented attacks that would have crippled American infrastructure. I've protected information that keeps this country safe. We're proud of you, my father said, though the words sounded hollow after years of indifference. Are you, or are you just embarrassed that you were wrong? He didn't answer, which was answer enough. My mother stood and walked over to me, her hands shaking as she reached up to touch the colonel's insignia on my uniform. My daughter, the colonel, she whispered. I should have known. I should have seen it. You saw what you expected to see. Can you forgive us? She asked, tears flowing freely now. I looked at this woman who had birthed me, raised me, and spent 8 years pitying me for choices she never tried to understand. I don't need your forgiveness, Mom. I need your respect. I need you to understand that your approval was never what I was working toward. Then, what were you working toward? David asked. Purpose. Service. Making a difference in ways that matter. I paused, looking around the room one more time. I found all of that. The question is whether you can accept that I found it without your permission. Emma stood up suddenly. Rachel, I want to understand. Can you tell us about your work? I mean, what are you allowed to tell us? For the first time since entering the house, I smiled. Some of it. The unclassified parts. I spent the next 2 hours explaining my career in terms they could understand. The cyber warfare operations I couldn't detail, but I could describe the general mission. The classified briefings I couldn't reveal, but I could explain the responsibility of advising senior officials. The intelligence analysis I couldn't share, but I could help them understand the stakes. By the time I finished, they were looking at me like they'd never seen me before. Which, in many ways, they hadn't. One more thing, I said as I prepared to leave. David, your Hartwell case, the Pentagon's decision isn't personal, but it is final. The software fails basic security requirements. Your client will need to start over. I understand, he said quietly. Will you? Can I call you? If I have questions about cybersecurity law. You can call Colonel Martinez at the Pentagon, I said with a slight smile. She's very good at what she does. As I drove back to Washington, my phone buzzed with a text from my commanding officer. Excellent work on the Hartwell evaluation. New assignment, Monday, briefing the Joint Chiefs on emerging threats. Congratulations, Colonel. I smiled and accelerated toward the Beltway. Toward my real life. Toward the work that had always mattered more than family approval. Behind me, the Martinez family would spend the rest of the evening recalibrating their understanding of success, failure, and the daughter they'd never really known. And for the first time in 8 years, that was perfectly fine with me. 6 months later, I received an invitation to David's wedding anniversary party. The invitation was addressed to Colonel Rachel Martinez, Ph.D. Apparently, they'd done some research and discovered my doctoral degree in cybersecurity, earned through night classes during my deployment years. I attended the party, wore my dress uniform, and watched my family introduce me to their friends with genuine pride. The transformation was complete. I was no longer the family disappointment. I was the colonel. But more importantly, I had finally stopped needing their approval to know my own worth. The work continued. The threats never stopped, and Colonel Martinez kept America safe, one classified briefing at a time. Some stories don't end with reconciliation or family dinners. Some stories end with respect, earned through service, measured in lives protected rather than approval gained. That's the story I choose to tell. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.